carried her wedding ring before sunrise because she believed love had already died once, and hope had died with it. By sunset, someone would ask why a German widow had risked everything for the child of an enemy. The answer would leave hardened soldiers speechless, but no one knew it yet. The strangest part was not that she hid the boy. It was that she had every reason to walk away, and somehow she couldn't. Long before anyone learned his name, before anyone understood how he had crossed a continent shattered by war, one impossible choice quietly began rewriting two broken lives. Spring arrived in Germany without celebration. The guns had grown distant, but silence felt heavier than explosions ever had. Anna Keller, 32 years old, stepped carefully through the remains of what had once been her home, carrying a small wooden box beneath one arm. Inside rested the last reminders of the family she had lost. She knelt beside the roots of an old apple tree that somehow still stood after months of destruction. Without a word, she placed her wedding ring inside the box and covered it with cool earth. The ring had survived the war. Her husband had not. As she pressed the soil flat with trembling hands, she whispered no prayer and made no promise. Instead, she reached a quiet decision. She would stop waiting. She would stop believing tomorrow might return what yesterday had stolen. She would simply survive, asking nothing more from the world than another ordinary sunrise. The next morning arrived wrapped in a gray mist that softened broken walls and empty streets. Anna carried a small wicker basket, hoping to trade an old linen cloth for a loaf of bread at the village market. Few people spoke. Those who did kept their eyes low, as if every conversation carried the weight of another goodbye. The road curved past the remains of an abandoned school, where shattered windows reflected the pale morning light. Then she heard it. Not a shout, not footsteps, just the quiet sound of a child trying very hard not to cry. She stopped. The wind faded. Even the birds seemed to disappear. The sound came again, hidden beneath the collapsed doorway. Anna slowly pushed aside loose bricks with careful hands until she found a narrow opening. Inside, a little boy sat curled against the cold stone wall, clutching a worn cloth rabbit with one missing ear. His blonde hair was covered in dust, and his pale blue eyes never left her face. He could not have been older than 6. Around his neck hung a small metal identification tag, engraved in English. Anna recognized only 2 words: Michael Carter. The child stared at her without speaking, frightened but strangely calm, as though he had already learned that tears could not always bring someone back. For several long seconds, neither of them moved. One carried the grief of losing a family. The other carried the silence of searching for one. Anna had seen enough loss to recognize the look in the boy's eyes. It was not fear alone. It was the quiet exhaustion that came after waiting too long for someone who never returned. She reached into her basket and broke the last piece of rye bread in half. Without speaking, she held one piece toward him. Michael hesitated, studying her face more carefully than the bread itself. Then his small hand reached forward. He accepted it with the careful manners of a child who had once been taught never to forget gratitude. He whispered something in English. Anna understood only one word: thank you. She answered with the only language that mattered at that moment: a gentle smile. Outside, church bells echoed across the damaged town, carried by a cool morning breeze. Anna looked again at the metal tag around his neck. If American soldiers returned soon, perhaps they would find him. If frightened civilians found him first, they might see only the uniform his father had worn. She closed her eyes for a brief second, hearing her own promise from the day before. She would ask nothing more from the world. Yet the world had placed a hungry child in front of her. Quietly, she held out her hand. Michael looked at it, then slowly stood. Their fingers met without trust, without certainty, only with the fragile hope that neither of them would have to face another sunset alone. The cottage was barely standing, but its roof still kept out the rain. One window remained unbroken, allowing the afternoon sunlight to spill across the worn wooden floor, where dust drifted through the air like tiny stars. Anna filled a dented kettle with water from the hand pump behind the house, and warmed a thin potato soup over a small cast-iron stove. Michael sat quietly at the table, his cloth rabbit resting beside an empty bowl. He watched every movement she made, saying nothing, as though silence had become the safest language he knew. When she placed the bowl in front of him, he waited. Anna gently nodded. Only then did he lift the spoon. The habit caught her by surprise. Someone had taught him patience before the war had taught him fear. After the meal, she searched an old wooden chest until she found a faded wool sweater that had belonged to her younger brother years earlier. It hung loosely from Michael's shoulders, but it was warm. He looked down at the sleeves, then back at her with a shy smile that appeared for only a second before disappearing again. As evening settled over the quiet village, Anna lit a single oil lamp. Michael reached into his pocket, unfolded a small family photograph with careful hands, and stared at it beneath the soft golden light. He traced two familiar faces with one finger, then looked toward Anna without speaking. She understood the question even without knowing a single English word. He was not asking where they were, he was asking if they would ever come back. Morning arrived with the smell of damp earth and fresh wood smoke drifting through the broken village. For the first time in many months, the little cottage did not feel completely empty. Michael helped without being asked. He folded his blanket carefully, carried pieces of firewood that were almost too large for his small arms, and smiled proudly each time Anna nodded with quiet approval. They still shared almost no common words, yet each hour made translation less necessary. A pointed finger, a patient glance, or the simple offering of a warm cup was enough. By the third day, however, whispers had begun traveling faster than the wind. An elderly neighbor mentioned hearing a child's laughter where no children were supposed to be. Another claimed tiny footprints led toward Anna's garden after the previous night's rain. Nobody accused her directly, but curiosity was slowly replacing sympathy. That afternoon, while trading for flour, Anna noticed conversations stopping the moment she approached. Eyes followed her longer than before. On her walk home, she took a different path through the orchard, avoiding the village square altogether. Michael waited behind the curtains exactly as she had shown him, peeking through only after hearing her familiar knock. When Anna stepped inside, she found a small surprise waiting on the kitchen table. Using bits of charcoal from the stove, Michael had drawn a picture of the two of them beneath the old apple tree, standing side by side, with a tiny sun rising above the branches. The drawing remained on the table long after the evening meal had ended. Anna looked at the rough charcoal lines again before carefully folding the paper and placing it inside the same wooden box that now rested beneath her bed. It no longer held only memories of the family she had lost. It had begun protecting the fragile pieces of a future she had never expected. Outside, the village settled into another quiet night until the distant sound of engines drifted across the fields. Michael froze. His small hands tightened around the cloth rabbit, and his eyes searched Anna's face for an answer she did not have. She stepped to the window just enough to see several military trucks moving slowly along the main road. American soldiers were returning, stopping at farms and cottages, asking questions that traveled from door to door. By morning, the entire village knew they were searching for missing civilians and separated children. Relief should have been the only thing Anna felt. Instead, an unfamiliar weight settled in her chest. She had hoped for this moment from the day she found him, yet the thought of the cottage becoming silent again felt strangely unbearable. A firm knock echoed from the front door. Once, then twice. Michael instinctively stepped behind her without making a sound. Anna drew a slow breath, rested one steady hand on the wooden latch, and realized that every choice she had made during the past few days was now waiting on the other side of that door. Anna opened the door slowly. 3 American soldiers stood outside with dust on their boots and exhaustion in their eyes. The officer at the front removed his cap before speaking through a young interpreter. They were searching for missing children separated during the final weeks of the war. Anna listened without interrupting. Then the interpreter unfolded a worn photograph. It showed a smiling boy standing between a man in uniform and a woman wearing a light summer dress. Anna felt her breath catch. The little face was unmistakable. Before she could answer, Michael stepped from behind her, his blue eyes fixed on the photograph, then on the officer. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The officer slowly knelt until he was at the child's eye level. In careful English, he softly asked, "Michael?" The boy tightened his grip on the cloth rabbit, but did not run forward. Instead, he turned toward Anna. His small hand reached for hers with complete trust. The soldiers exchanged silent glances. Whatever story they had expected to find, this was not it. The interpreter quietly explained that Michael's father, Captain James Carter, had disappeared during the confusion of the occupation, while search teams had spent weeks looking for the missing child across nearby towns. The officer lowered his eyes for a moment before looking back at Anna. He had arrived expecting to recover an American boy. Instead, He had found a German widow who had protected him long enough for hope to catch up with them both. The officer slowly rose to his feet, but he did not reach for the boy. Instead, he looked toward Anna with an expression that needed no translation. Respect had quietly replaced suspicion. The interpreter spoke again, explaining that Captain James Carter had been confirmed alive at a nearby military hospital after weeks without communication. His first request had not been for new orders or supplies, it had been to find his son. Anna closed her eyes for a brief moment, and the weight she had carried since opening her cottage door finally began to lift. She knelt beside Michael and gently straightened the collar of the oversized wool sweater. Then she brushed a little dust from his blonde hair exactly as a mother might before sending her child into the world. Michael wrapped both arms around her without warning. The little cloth rabbit remained pressed between them. No one interrupted the embrace. Even the soldiers stood in complete silence beneath the pale afternoon sky. After a long moment, Anna placed the folded charcoal drawing into Michael's hands. He studied the picture, then looked back at her with tears he could not explain. She rested one hand against his cheek and whispered softly in German, knowing he would understand only her voice. The officer quietly removed his cap. Sometimes courage was not found on a battlefield. Sometimes it was found inside a small cottage where a grieving widow had chosen compassion before she knew anyone would ever witness it. 50 years passed with remarkable quiet. Seasons came and went, cities were rebuilt, children became parents, and memories slowly turned into history. Yet one promise refused to fade. On a bright spring morning, a silver-haired man stepped from a train carrying a small wooden box beneath one arm. Michael Carter had returned. Beside him walked his own grandson, a curious boy with the same blue eyes that had once searched for comfort inside a ruined cottage. They followed a narrow path to a hillside cemetery where wildflowers moved gently beneath a warm breeze. Anna Keller's grave was simple, marked only by her name and 2 dates carved into weathered stone. Michael knelt without speaking. From the wooden box he removed the faded charcoal drawing that had traveled with him across half a century. Time had softened its edges, but the little sun above the apple tree still remained. He placed it carefully against the headstone before laying fresh white flowers beside it. His grandson looked up and quietly asked who she had been. Michael smiled through grateful tears and answered without hesitation, "She was the reason I lived long enough to become your grandfather." The boy reached down and gently straightened the flowers. The wind stirred through the old trees, carrying only silence. Wars are remembered for the lives they take. History is changed by the quiet souls who choose to protect one life when no one is watching. Anna never asked to become a hero. She simply refused to let an innocent child become another casualty of hatred, and in doing so, she proved that compassion can outlive every battlefield.